9 years of silence. One phone call. And a list of demands typed up like she was ordering off a menu. That's what my mother brought to my front door the day our story went public. A folded piece of paper with 4 items on it, as if she were owed a refund on a decade she'd thrown away herself. She had no idea that piece of paper was about to become the most expensive mistake she ever made. 9 years earlier, I stood in my parents' living room in San Jose and told them I was marrying Linda. My mother didn't yell. That would have almost been easier. She just set her coffee cup down on the side table, slow and deliberate, choosing the cruelest possible words. "You're going to do this to us?" she said. "Do what, Mom? Fall in love? Don't be smart with me, Gregory." My father didn't even look up from the television. That told me everything I needed to know about where he stood, which was exactly nowhere, as usual. He'd always been that way. A man who let silence do his arguing for him, who thought neutrality was the same thing as peace. I used to think that made him the safe parent. That evening taught me otherwise. Silence, I learned, can be its own kind of verdict. My sister Tiffany was the only one who looked like she wanted to say something. She was 20 years old then, still living at home, still terrified of our mother's voice the way I'd been my entire childhood. She caught my eye for half a second. Then she stared down at the carpet. "If you marry that woman," my mother said, "don't call this house again." "That woman has a name," I said. "It's Linda. I don't care what her name is." My Aunt Yvonne was there too. She'd basically appointed herself the family's moral compass ever since my grandmother passed, and she stood up like she'd been waiting for her cue. "Gregory, honey, think about your children," Yvonne said. "Think about what kind of life you're setting them up for." "I am thinking about them," I replied. "I'm thinking they'll grow up in a house where their parents actually love each other, which is more than I can say for this one." That's when my mother picked her coffee cup back up, signaling the conversation was over. She'd made her ruling and didn't need closing arguments. I remember standing out in the driveway afterward, keys shaking in my hand, wondering if I'd just imagined the whole thing. 26 years in that house. Every birthday, every scraped knee, every report card taped to the refrigerator. All of it, apparently, conditional. I hadn't known family love could come with fine print. I found out that evening. Welcome back to Dad's Sweet Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, every villain in these stories thought they were the smartest person in the room. They were not. Subscribe so you never miss a story. I married Linda 4 months after that night. It was a small ceremony. My future business partner, Donovan, stood up as my best man, since apparently blood only counts when it's convenient. Linda's whole family came. Her mother cried through the entire ceremony. Good tears, the kind you're supposed to cry at a wedding. Her father walked her down the aisle and shook my hand afterward with a grip that told me he'd already decided he liked me, and that was worth more to me than I let on. My side of the aisle had exactly 11 people on it. 8 of them were friends who'd shown up because they loved me, not out of obligation. Shane was one of them, standing near the back in a suit that didn't quite fit him, grinning the whole time like he couldn't believe I'd actually pulled it off. That empty side of the aisle was the last time my family would ever get the chance to stand next to me for free. Growing up, I always thought of my mother as the center of gravity in our house. Every decision, big or small, orbited around what she'd think of it. My father chose his job because she wanted stability. Tiffany chose her college major because our mother had opinions about which fields were respectable. I chose to keep my head down through most of my childhood because that was the path of least resistance. It worked, right up until the moment it didn't. Meeting Linda was the first time in my life I'd ever wanted something badly enough to risk that gravity pulling me apart instead of holding me together. I met her at a mutual friend's barbecue, the kind of afternoon where you don't expect your whole life to reroute itself, and then it does anyway. She was arguing, good-naturedly, with someone about whether store-bought barbecue sauce could ever compete with homemade. I remember thinking that anyone who defended good cooking with that much conviction was somebody I needed to know better. 6 months later, I was bringing her home to meet my parents, naively certain that anyone who met her would feel exactly what I felt. I was wrong, and I spent the better part of a year afterward trying to convince myself that maybe, with enough time, my mother's position might soften. It never did. If anything, the silence just calcified, year after year, until it became the only version of her I had left. Here's the thing about being disowned. It forces you to figure out who you actually are without anyone's permission. Linda and I started small. She'd grown up cooking her grandmother's recipes, a line of hot sauces and pepper jellies that she used to sell out of a folding table at the farmer's market on the east side of San Jose. I was working a sales job I hated, coming home smelling like a car dealership, and on the weekends I'd help her load jars into the back of my car and haul them out to whatever market would have us. "You know this is never going to make us rich," she told me once, laughing, wiping vinegar off her hands with a dish towel. "Good thing I didn't marry you for the money," I said. Smart, because there wasn't any. Those early markets were humbling. Some Saturdays we'd sell out by 10 in the morning. Other times we'd stand behind that folding table for 6 hours and sell 4 jars to people who mostly wanted to know if the hot sauce was actually spicy before wandering off. I learned patience I didn't know I had. Linda already had it. She'd grown up watching her grandmother cook for a family of 9 on a single stove, and she treated every setback like it was just another ingredient she hadn't measured out yet. We built Sullivan and Grady sauces. Her maiden name was Grady, and she insisted both names go on the label, side by side, like a promise. We ran it out of a rented commercial kitchen for 6 years. 6 years of 16-hour days, of maxed-out credit cards, of me picking up freight hauling gigs on the side just to keep the lights on in our warehouse space. There were months we ate the product we couldn't sell instead of groceries, joking that at least we'd never get scurvy with that much vitamin C in the peppers. There were nights Linda sat at our kitchen table, doing inventory by hand because we couldn't yet afford the software, and I'd sit across from her doing the same thing with our bills. Somewhere around midnight we'd just look at each other and laugh, because what else was there to do? My business partner Donovan came on when we were still tiny. He handled the numbers, I handled operations. Linda handled the product. We fought like siblings. We celebrated like family. Donovan had walked away from a stable accounting job to bet on us, and more than once I asked him why. Because everybody else in my life plays it safe, he told me once, and I wanted to be around people who didn't. When Costco finally picked up our first product line, the 3 of us sat in our kitchen and cried like idiots. Linda kept saying they actually said yes over and over, as if repeating it would make it real. I remember calling Shane that same night just to tell somebody, anybody, who'd actually be happy for us. That was the beginning. It took 3 more years after that, and a woman named Archer, a food and beverage consultant we hired, to help us navigate a much bigger opportunity, to get us to the point where a national food conglomerate made an offer to acquire the company outright. Archer was blunt, in a way I appreciated immediately. The first time we met, she looked over our numbers, our contracts, and our growth curve, and said, "You two have built something real. Don't let anyone talk you into selling it for less than it's worth, and don't let anyone talk you into keeping it if the offer's actually good." That kind of honesty was rare, and it was exactly what we needed heading into negotiations neither of us had any real experience with. The negotiation itself took the better part of a year. The first offer the conglomerate put on the table was low, nowhere near what Archer believed the company was actually worth, and she told us flatly to walk away, rather than accept it out of fear. "They'll come back," she said. "Companies like this don't approach small brands unless they've already decided they want them. The first number is never the real number." She was right. 3 months later, a second offer came in, higher but still short. Donovan ran the projections late into countless nights, modeling out what the company could be worth if we kept growing independently for another 5 years versus what a lump sum today could do for us, weighing risk against certainty until my head spun. Linda, meanwhile, kept doing what she'd always done best. She kept making the sauce, kept perfecting the recipes, kept reminding all of us that none of the numbers mattered if the product itself ever stopped being something people actually wanted to put on their food. "They're not buying spreadsheets," she said once, during a particularly tense negotiation call. "They're buying trust. People trust us because the sauce is good and the story is real. Don't let the number make you forget that. $11 million. You sure about this?" Archer asked me the day the final paperwork came through. "Once you sign, it's real. There's no undoing it." I looked at Linda. 9 years of building something out of nothing, out of vinegar and pepper seeds and stubbornness. "And here we were. I've never been more sure of anything," I said. We signed, and 2 weeks later, a business journalist reached out to Linda's social media page, wanting to do a feature. From farmer's market to 11 million. The untold story of Sullivan and Grady. It ran everywhere. Local news picked it up. A national morning show wanted us for a segment. Our faces were suddenly on screens in living rooms all across the country, including, inevitably, the living room I grew up in, 20 minutes from where I now lived with my wife and our 2 kids. My mother watched that segment 3 times before she finally picked up the phone. There were milestones along the way that I used to think, naively, might be the thing that finally broke through her silence. The birth of our first child, a daughter with Linda's stubborn chin and my father's exact shade of hazel eyes. Not that he'd ever get the chance to notice the resemblance. I sent an announcement anyway. The first year, some small, foolish hope still alive in me that a grandchild might soften what an in-law never could. Nothing came back. Not a card. Not a call. Just silence, same as always, delivered right on schedule. Our son came 2 years after that, and by then I'd stopped sending announcements. Linda and I built our own version of family instead. Holidays with her parents. Birthdays crowded with friends like Shane and Donovan, who had become closer than blood. Shane even taught our daughter to ride a bike in our driveway, because I'd broken my wrist the week before and couldn't run alongside her. Donovan and his wife, Crystal, became the honorary aunt and uncle. Crystal was there for every first day of school, every scraped knee, and every terrible homemade birthday cake Linda and I attempted, and mostly ruined together. It wasn't the family I'd grown up expecting to have. It was better, because every single person in it had actually chosen to be there. I used to feel a strange low hum of grief on the holidays, watching Linda's parents dote on our children, with the kind of easy warmth that should have come from both sides. I never told Linda how much that hum bothered me, because I didn't want her carrying any more weight than she already did just for existing in a family that had decided her skin was a disqualifying trait. But it was there, quietly, for years. It didn't disappear until the day I finally understood that hoping for something my mother was never going to give me had been its own kind of self-inflicted wound. The call came in on a regular afternoon. I almost didn't answer it, the number wasn't saved, but something made me pick up. Gregory. I hadn't heard that voice in 9 years, and it still made something in my chest tighten up like a fist. "Mom, I saw you on the television," she said, as though she were simply commenting on the weather. "You and Linda, that's her name. Yeah. $11 million. Gregory. That's what they're saying." There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing, could practically hear the gears turning behind the silence. "We should talk," she said. "As a family." "Funny," I said. "I don't remember you using that word in about 9 years. Don't be difficult. I'm your mother." "You were," I said. "Then you chose not to be. You made that decision. Not me." "I'd like to come by," she said, entirely ignoring my words, which was exactly her style. "This weekend." I should have said no. Every instinct in my body told me to slam the phone down. But there was a small, curious, almost scientific part of me that wanted to see exactly how far she'd go. "Fine," I said. "Come by." That single word, "fine," was about to set off the most satisfying chain of events of my entire life. After I hung up, I sat there staring at the screen for a long time. 9 years of practiced indifference, and one short call had cracked it wide open in under 2 minutes. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was completely over it. But some part of me, the part that still remembered being a little boy running to her with a bruised elbow, needed to see if there was anything left behind that voice besides greed. There wasn't, and I was about to let her prove it to me in person. I told Linda that night, sitting across from her at our kitchen table, the exact same table where we used to count out crumpled single-dollar bills from our early days at the farmer's market. "She wants to come here," I said, "to the house." Linda set her fork down slowly. "After 9 years. After $11 million, I corrected. "What do you want to do?" That was the real question, wasn't it? Because there were 2 versions of me sitting at that table. One version wanted to slam the door in her face the split second she showed up, and never look back. But the other version, the one that had spent nearly a decade watching my mother's absence shape every holiday, my kids growing up without a grandmother, my wife carrying the quiet weight of being blamed for a family's fracture, That version wanted something permanent. I want the world to see exactly who she is, I told her. Not just hear about it secondhand. I want them to see it. Linda tilted her head. You want to record her? I want to record every single second. And then what? And then I want everyone who ever wondered why my own parents weren't in our wedding photos to finally get a clear answer. Linda thought about it for a long moment, turning her water glass slowly on the table. I need you to promise me something, she finally said. Anything. Promise me this isn't about proving something to her. Promise me it's about finally telling the truth, out loud, where she can't twist it into something smaller. I promise, I said. And I meant it. I called my old childhood friend Shane the next morning. We'd grown up 2 houses down from each other, and after high school, he'd gone into video production. He did mostly commercial work and the occasional wedding, but I knew he had the high-end equipment and, more importantly, the total discretion to set up cameras in a way nobody would ever notice. You want to do what? Shane asked when I laid it out for him. Wire the living room. Small stuff. The kind of gear you'd use for a high-end documentary. I want tight angles on the couch, on the front door, and I want audio that's completely clean. Gregory, this is your mother we're talking about. It was, I said. She resigned from that position 9 years ago. Now she's just a stranger showing up with a list of demands. Do you already know what's on it? I don't need to see the paper to know what kind of person wrote it. I told him. There was a long silence on the line. Then Shane exhaled heavily. I still remember your wedding, he said quietly. I remember looking over at that completely empty side of the room and thinking, man, what a loss for them. I'll be there, man. I'll bring everything we need. Shane came by 2 days before the scheduled visit. He installed everything so seamlessly that I forgot the lenses were even there by the following afternoon. 4 angles. 2 hidden audio pickups. Everything fed directly to a secure hard drive in my home office, completely offline. I wanted total control over what happened with that footage, and when. One thing, Shane said, standing back to look over the room. Think hard about whether you actually want to release this. Once it's hit the internet, it's out there forever. There's no taking it back. I know, I replied. I've had 9 years to think it through. I also looped in Archer, the consultant who had helped us navigate our multi-million-dollar acquisition. She built her career on knowing exactly how narratives move through the media, which levers to pull, and when to pull them. I need your perspective, I told her. Not for the brand. For something deeply personal. I explained the disownment, the cold shoulder, the sudden phone call, and the upcoming visit. Archer was silent on the line for a moment. You want this to go public. I want the whole country to know exactly what kind of woman disowns her son for marrying a black woman, stays dead silent for 9 years, and then shows up with her hand out the very second a number hits the news. That's not advice I usually give, Archer said flatly. But I like you. I respect your wife. And frankly, a woman like that deserves the exposure. Here's exactly how we're going to handle it. Finally, I called Donovan. It was mostly out of habit. He'd been my sounding board for every major turning point since we founded the company. You don't need my permission for this, Gregory, Donovan said. But if you're asking whether I think it's the right move, absolutely. Some debts don't get erased just because a decade flew by. She had 9 years to make this right privately. Instead, she chose to do it loudly, with a list of terms in your own living room. Let the world see the choice she made. The day arrived. I had sent our 2 kids to spend the afternoon with Linda's sister Crystal, who lived across town. I wanted them nowhere near the blast radius of whatever was about to go down. Crystal didn't ask a single question when I called her. She'd been on the front lines of our history long enough to understand. Just know they're safe, happy, and completely oblivious, I told her. They're going to be spoiled rotten and asleep by 8, Crystal promised. Go take care of your business. Linda, however, completely refused to leave. This affects me too, she said, adjusting a picture frame on the wall that was already perfectly straight. I am not hiding out in our bedroom while your mother sits in my house. I'm not asking you to hide, I said, catching her hands. I just want you guarded. She's going to say something ugly. She always does. Let her, Linda said, looking me dead in the eye. I've survived 9 years of her silence. I can survive 20 minutes of her voice. At exactly 2 o'clock, my mother's car pulled into our driveway. I watched from the front window as she sat in the driver's seat for a full 60 seconds before stepping out, almost like she was running through her lines one last time. She looked much older than I remembered. Time has a way of doing that. Her hair had turned completely gray, and there was a distinct stiffness in her stride as she walked up the path, as if her joints were giving her trouble. For a fraction of a second, a small residual part of me, the little boy who used to run to her with a scraped knee, felt a pang of sympathy. Then she knocked, and the moment I swung the door open, the very first words out of her mouth were, "You've done very well for yourselves. No hello. No, I've missed you. No, I'm so sorry." Just a cold appraisal, like a real estate agent inspecting a property before making an offer. "Come in," I said. She stepped inside, her eyes sweeping over our entryway, the living room, the family photos on the walls, and a framed magazine feature detailing our acquisition. Finally, her gaze settled on a portrait of Linda and me from our wedding day. "Linda," my mother said, offering a single, curt nod, as if checking an administrative box. "Hello," Linda replied, her tone smooth and level, completely controlled. "It's been a long time." "It has," my mother agreed, completely bypassing any semblance of an apology, treating the 9-year void like a minor scheduling conflict. We took our seats. My mother sat in the armchair, while Linda and I sat on the couch directly opposite her. I could practically feel the presence of the hidden cameras Shane had tucked away, hidden in the bookshelf, masked behind a houseplant, built right into a frame. Every single word she was about to utter was going to be preserved forever. So, my mother began, folding her hands neatly in her lap. $11 million. "That's the number," I said. "That's wonderful, Gregory, truly." She spoke with a layer of pride that was almost impressive, considering the reality of why she was here. "I always knew you had that drive in you, even when you were young." "Funny," I countered. "You didn't seem to think I had much of anything in me 9 years ago." Her jaw tightened instantly. "That was an entirely different situation." "Was it?" "The situation didn't change, Mom. The only thing that changed is our bank account. I am here now," she said, as if showing up today made up for a decade of abandonment. "You are," I agreed, "and I'm highly curious about what finally brought you around." She reached into her purse and pulled out a neatly folded piece of paper. My stomach dropped a fraction, even though I knew exactly what it was. There is a vast difference between anticipating a moment and watching it play out in front of your face. "I wanted to discuss the family," she said, slowly unfolding the page, "and how we move forward from here." "Move forward how?" She cleared her throat, and without a single shred of hesitation, she began reading from that list like a corporate executive presenting a restructuring proposal. "First," she read, "I think it's only equitable that a portion of this sudden wealth be set aside to secure your father and me for our retirement years. We aren't getting any younger, and family takes care of family." I said absolutely nothing. I just sat there and let the microphone catch every syllable. "Second, I would like us to schedule a formal family portrait, all of us together, so we can put the past behind us in a very public way. It would mean a tremendous amount to your Aunt Yvonne as well. She's been asking about you constantly." "Third," she continued, and I felt Linda's hand tighten slightly against my leg, "I think it would be highly appropriate for you to provide the capital to get your cousin into the restaurant space. He's been struggling for years, and with the kind of leverage and connections you have now." "And what's number 4? I interrupted. She looked up from the paper, completely unfazed. "Fourth, I expect an apology for the disrespectful way you spoke to me 9 years ago in front of your Aunt Yvonne. It was uncalled for." I sat there for a beat, letting the sheer absurdity of the moment breathe. 9 years of absolute exile, a wedding they intentionally boycotted, grandchildren whose voices they wouldn't recognize on the phone. And her primary demand was a check, a photo op, and an apology from me. "Let me make sure I have this completely straight," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "You disowned me for marrying my wife. You cut off all communication for 9 years, no calls, no cards, nothing. And now you walk into my home demanding a retirement fund, a public PR stunt, a handout from my cousin, and an apology. From me. Gregory, there's no need to be difficult. It's not difficult at all," I said. "In fact, it's crystal clear. You didn't drive over here because you missed your son. You drove over here because you saw an 8-figure sum on the news and realized your silence was a terrible financial investment. That is entirely unfair. No, I shot back. What's unfair is my children growing up without a grandmother because of your pride. What's unfair is my wife sitting in this room right now, showing basic decency to a woman who refused to even say her name out loud for a decade. That's what's unfair, Mom, this list? It's just pathetic. Her face flushed a deep, angry crimson. I am still your mother. You were, I told her, but you forfeited that title the day you decided your love came with a racial qualification. You always did love a flair for the dramatic, she muttered, folding the paper back up as if her rigid composure could somehow save her from losing the room. I raised you better than this. You raised me to keep my head down and accept intolerance, I replied. I unlearned that a long time ago. It was the best decision I ever made. Linda hadn't spoken a word through the entire exchange, but I felt her shift beside me, shoulders back, chin perfectly level. I'd like to say something, Linda said quietly. My mother's eyes flicked over to her, completely reluctant, clearly hating the fact that she had to address her directly. 9 years ago, Linda said, her tone smooth and lethal. You sat across from me at a dinner table for maybe 10 minutes total before deciding everything you needed to know about my worth. You didn't ask about my career, my character, or how I loved your son. You looked at my skin, made your choice, and vanished. I don't expect you to understand the protective instincts of a mother. My mother snapped. I understand them perfectly, Linda answered. I just don't respect yours. There is a massive difference. And I want you to understand something else clearly. I never once asked Gregory to choose between you and me. He made that decision entirely on his own, because your prejudice made it impossible for him to do anything else. My mother's icy exterior cracked. Just a fraction. You have no idea what it feels like to watch your child walk down a path you're terrified of. You're right, Linda said calmly. I don't. Because I'm raising my 2 children in a home filled with unconditional love and safety, completely free of the toxic fear you just described. Maybe the path was never the problem. Maybe it was always you. My mother's mouth opened to fire back a response, but I stood up before she could utter a single word. We're done here. It's time for you to leave, I said. Gregory, you came into my home with an invoice disguised as a family reunion, I told her, pointing directly at the door. You didn't come to apologize. You haven't asked a single question about your grandchildren. You came because you thought $11 million wiped clean 9 years of hatred. It doesn't. So this is it? You're just going to throw away your flesh and blood? My mother stood up, clutching her folded list against her chest like a shield. Money has completely corrupted you, Gregory. Money didn't corrupt me, I said, staring her down. It just bought me the one thing you never gave me, the complete freedom to exist without your approval. I'm the exact same man I was at 26, standing in your living room telling you I'd found the woman I wanted to build a life with. You're the one who decided that life wasn't worth knowing. I'm just finally showing you the receipt. She went completely pale. You would actually humiliate your own mother for a headline? I would humiliate any person who discards their child over the color of his partner's skin, I said coldly. The fact that you happen to be my biological mother doesn't make it a tragedy. It makes it a necessity. For a split second, her eyes welled up, the very first genuine break in her mask since she walked through the door, but it passed instantly, her jaw setting into that same stubborn, rigid line I knew all too well from my youth. The line that meant she would gladly burn her entire life to the ground before admitting she was wrong. You threw it all away, I said quietly, opening the front door. I'm just delivering the bill. I had no idea that phrase, I'm just delivering the bill, was about to echo across millions of screens. She stormed out, her folded list still clutched tightly in her hand. I watched her sedan back out of the driveway and disappear down the block. The house fell completely, beautifully still. Are you okay? Linda asked, walking over to me. I don't know yet, I admitted honestly. Ask me in a week. Linda wrapped her arms around my neck, and I just stood there in the entryway, breathing her in, letting the massive rush of adrenaline finally drain out of my frame. For 9 long years I had rehearsed exactly what I would say if I ever faced her again, but the actual reality of it had been both entirely expected and completely surreal. That same evening, Shane and I sat down in my home office to review the multicam footage. Every angle was immaculate, the audio crystal clear. The entire confrontation was captured exactly as it happened. No edits, no narrative spin. The raw truth didn't need any enhancement. "This is," Shane whistled, shaking his head as the monitor played back the mother's demands. "Gregory, this is absolute annihilation. This is going to utterly destroy her public standing." "Good," I said. "I'm serious, man. Once this goes live, there's no pulling it down. People are going to know her face, her neighborhood. This isn't an anonymous message board post. This is as real as it gets. She made it real the day she valued her prejudice over her son," I told him. "I'm just making sure the public sees the consequences of that choice." We ran through the tape twice more, Shane tagging the timestamps and cutting out any dead air. By the time the final export finished, it was past midnight. Shane leaned back in his chair, staring at the glowing screen. "For what it's worth," he said softly, "I've known you since we were boys. I never understood how a mother could do that to her own kid. Watching this, I still don't get it, but at least now, the entire world will see what I've always known about you and Linda." The next morning, I jumped on a call with Archer. "The footage is cut and ready," I told her. "Send the file over," she replied. "Let's deploy this the right way." Archer's strategy was brilliant, executed with surgical precision. We didn't just dump a random video onto a fresh channel to get buried by the algorithm. We coordinated with the business outlet that had handled our acquisition feature, pitching it as an exclusive, raw follow-up. The public had already fallen in love with our farmers market to millions story. Now they were going to get the hidden perspective, the mother who abandoned the architect of that success, only to show up demanding a payout the second the paperwork cleared. "Audiences love a true success story," Archer explained, "but they absolutely live for a narrative reversal. Right now, your mother thinks she still holds the psychological high ground. She's about to find out how powerless she actually is, in front of an audience of millions." Archer helped streamline the final piece into a devastating 11-minute segment. No dramatic music, no cheesy sound effects. Just my mother, sitting in our living room, reading financial terms off a folded sheet of paper, capped off by the line that would soon trend nationwide. "I'm just finally showing you the receipt." We hit publish on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Linda stood right beside me, her hand resting on my shoulder as I clicked the mouse. "No turning back now," she murmured. "There was never a way back," I said. "Not since the day she walked away." The video didn't just perform well. It went completely nuclear. Within the first 6 hours, the view count outpaced our original corporate feature. The comment sections turned into a massive psychological breakdown of my mother's behavior, with total strangers dissecting her expressions phrase by phrase. Clips of the exact moment she demanded an apology became an overnight symbol of toxic family entitlement. Major news networks that had covered our business deal picked up the viral fallout within 24 hours. My phone was a constant blur of notifications. Old high school classmates, complete strangers, business associates. One email came from a woman who had been disowned under nearly identical circumstances. She thanked me for giving a voice to a pain she had never been able to articulate to the outside world. Another came from a young man who wrote that the video gave him the backbone to finally cut ties with an abusive parent who only valued him for his financial output. Donovan called me the next morning, his voice a mix of awe and laughter. "Gregory, our direct web traffic has literally tripled overnight. I don't know whether to congratulate you or hire a security team. Probably a bit of both," I laughed. Within the week, a prominent national talk show invited Linda and me back to discuss the staggering cultural impact of the video. Archer spent hours prepping us for the broadcast, running mock interviews, anticipating aggressive angles, and ensuring our messaging stayed completely unshakable. "They are absolutely going to ask if you regret exposing her," Archer warned me during our final briefing. "They'll push the angle of whether a biological mother deserves a right to privacy, regardless of her flaws. Have your stance locked in." Sitting on that set the next day under the studio lights, with Linda's hand firmly in mine, the host leaned in and dropped the exact question Archer had predicted. I didn't take a single beat to hesitate. My mother enjoyed 9 full years of absolute privacy. I stated warmly into the camera. 9 years where the outside world had no idea how she had treated us. She used that privacy to erase herself from her grandchildren's lives without a single word. The exact moment she chose to walk onto my property with a list of financial demands instead of an apology, she forfeited her narrative control. I didn't expose her. I just stopped hiding her choices. That response became the definitive clip of the entire media cycle. Strangers online began using the term 9 years of privacy to describe the hypocrisy of toxic relatives who only value family when it's convenient. Linda's parents reached out to us shortly after the broadcast aired. Her mother was in tears on the phone, those same beautiful full-circle tears from our wedding day, telling Linda how incredibly proud she was of her strength. Her father, always a man of few words, spoke to me directly. "You protected your wife and stood your ground, son. That's the measure of a man. You did right." Hearing that from the man who had embraced me as a son from day one offered a profound sense of closure that my biological family had spent a lifetime denying me. And then, the one message I had actually been anticipating arrived. It was a text from my sister Tiffany. I just watched the broadcast. It read, "We need to talk, Gregory. Please." I dialed her number that exact evening. "Is it really true?" she asked the moment she picked up, her voice trembling. "The things she demanded on that paper, she actually read those to you?" "Word for word, Tiffany," I told her. "I can send you the unedited raw drive right now if you want to see it yourself." A heavy, emotional silence hung over the line. "I always held on to this childish hope," Tiffany whispered eventually, "that if enough time went by she'd finally wake up and apologize to you. I guess I was being naive, and now you see the reality," I said gently. "Now I see it," she agreed, her voice thick with emotion. "I am so deeply sorry, Gregory. I should have stood up for you 9 years ago in that living room. I was just a 20-year-old kid terrified of her wrath, and I let that fear cost me a decade with my brother." "You were under her roof, Tiffany," I said, easing the burden she'd been carrying. "You did what you had to do to survive that environment. I don't blame you for that. She's the one who built the wall. You just didn't have the tools to knock it down yet." "I want to see you guys," Tiffany said, a sudden clarity in her voice. "I want to meet Linda properly. I want to be an aunt to my niece and nephew if you'll let me. They are going to absolutely love you," I told her. And I meant it. Tiffany wasn't the source of the malice. She had just been another casualty of our mother's control. That I could easily forgive. My mother's calculated corporate greed, however, was a completely different story. My Aunt Yvonne, predictably, took a radically different path. She called me 2 days later, her voice trembling with pure, unadulterated rage. "Do you have any comprehension of what you've inflicted on your own mother?" she barked, skipping any greeting entirely. "She literally cannot step outside her house. People are identifying her at the local market." "That sounds like a direct consequence of her actions, Yvonne," I replied coolly. "Not a tragedy. You dragged her name through the mud. Publicly. In front of the entire country." "She dragged her own name through the mud," I corrected. "I simply made sure the cameras were rolling when she did it. Family does not do this to family, Gregory." "You're entirely right," I said, my voice hardening. "Family doesn't disown their son over the color of his wife's skin. Family doesn't vanish for close to a decade. And family certainly doesn't present an invoice the second a business acquisition goes public. My mother checked every single one of those boxes. I just stopped keeping her secrets. You have utterly destroyed her life. She had 9 years to build a life based on accountability," I told her. "She chose greed instead." "I didn't ruin anything, Yvonne. I just handed her the bill." "I was standing right there in that room 9 years ago," Yvonne hissed. "I warned you to think about your future children. You told me to worry about the social status of children who hadn't even been conceived yet," I fired back. "Yet you haven't spent a single second worrying about the 2 very real grandchildren who have spent their lives without a grandmother because of the hatred you and my mother fostered in that room. It's fascinating how your concern for family only ever applies when it protects your ego." Yvonne slammed the receiver down. I didn't bother calling back. A few weeks later, Shane sent over a screenshot from a community forum based in our old neighborhood. A former neighbor from our childhood block had penned a lengthy post recalling my mother from years prior, detailing how ruthlessly exclusive she had always been about which neighborhood kids were welcome at her dinner table, and which ones were subtly turned away. Reading those words, a profound realization washed over me. The 4 demands she brought into my home weren't a sudden, unhinged departure from her character. They were simply the ultimate, unfiltered manifestation of a psychological pattern that had been running her entire life. One that I had spent my childhood either ignoring or making excuses for. "Are you doing okay seeing all this laundry aired out online?" Shane checked in later that night. "Honestly? Yeah," I told him. "It's a lot easier to fully accept the reality of who your parents are when objective third parties lay it out with zero reason to lie." My cousin, the one my mother had tried to leverage me into financing, reached out shortly after. He sounded entirely mortified. "Gregory, I swear to you on everything I own, I had absolutely no idea she was going to use me as a bargaining chip," he said, his voice laced with panic. "I never asked her to do that. I would never dream of it. I know, man, I believe you," I assured him. He had always been a decent guy, even in a household where decency was treated like a weakness. "For what it's worth," he added quietly, "I think you did exactly the right thing. She's been sitting in that house talking about your acquisition money like it was a family inheritance she was personally owed. Like you owed her a dividend just for giving birth to you. How is your actual restaurant concept coming along?" I asked, steering the conversation to his real goals. "Slowly," he admitted. "But I'm doing it entirely on my own terms. I'd rather grind it out for another 5 years than take a single dollar that comes with the kind of strings she attaches to things." I respected that statement more than I could properly articulate. It was the exact same core truth I had embraced 9 years prior, that financial security or family approval isn't worth the price of your soul. My father, true to form, never uttered a single word. Not before the meeting. Not after the video went viral. Not once. His total silence spoke volumes, echoing his complete passivity from 9 years ago, when he refused to look up from the television screen. He had chosen his side a long time ago, settling into a coward's consistency. In the early years of our estrangement, I used to lose sleep, wondering if he secretly disagreed with my mother's hatred, but simply lacked the spine to challenge her. Watching his silence endure through a massive national scandal answered that question with total finality. A man's true character isn't defined by the quiet thoughts he keeps to himself. It's defined by what he is willing to stand up for out loud. My father had chosen, every single time, to stand for absolutely nothing. The final communication came from my mother herself, roughly 3 weeks after the video reached peak virality. I answered the unknown number, and her voice cut through the line without a hint of warmth. "You need to take that video down immediately, Gregory. It's completely upended your father's social standing. People are talking constantly. It's ruining us. No self-reflection. No baseline understanding of the pain she had caused. Just another executive order, wrapped up in a complaint about her own consequences." "No," I said flatly. "Gregory, you had 9 full years to pick up a phone and be a mother," I told her, my voice steady. "You chose to boycott my wedding. You chose to ignore the birth of my kids. You had thousands of opportunities to fix this privately, and you chose pride every single time. Now the world sees the exact receipt of those choices. I'm not taking down a single frame. You are actively tearing this family apart. There hasn't been a family here to tear apart for 9 years, I countered. You incinerated it in your living room. I just stopped hiding the ashes. I am still your children's grandmother." She cried out, her composure fracturing completely for the first time. "You are a total stranger to my children," I told her coldly. "And you finalized that choice the day you decided their mother's skin color made them unworthy of a phone call. Grandmother isn't a title you get to demand when your bank account runs low. It's an honor you earn with humility, something you have yet to show." "We're done, Mum." I ended the call. She never dialed my number again. Months turned into seasons. The footage continued to circulate in waves across the internet, routinely resurfacing as a case study in conditional love, prejudice, and the power of boundary setting. Ironically, the massive wave of public support for Sullivan and Grady sauces drove our brand visibility to unprecedented heights, making our new parent company absolutely thrilled with the acquisition. Archer frequently joked that my mother had inadvertently executed the most lucrative marketing campaign in modern food history. Tiffany became a permanent, beautiful anchor in our daily lives. She became a staple at weekend barbecues, birthdays, and school events, learning our kids' favorite games and inside jokes. She tried to apologize to Linda at first, but Linda simply cut her off with a hug, reminding her that she wasn't responsible for the sins of her mother. Crystal and Tiffany hit it off immediately, and our family gatherings no longer felt like a broken puzzle we were forcing together. They felt like a real family that had simply finally found its rhythm. Donovan and Archer remained tight fixtures in our inner circle. Every now and then, one of them will text over an article or a video essay analyzing the fallout of the receipt video. Always with the same note: "Still can't believe you actually pulled the trigger on that." I smile every single time I read it. My mother still resides in that same San Jose house. According to Tiffany, she rarely ventures out anymore, keeping the blinds drawn, fully aware that the community around her knows exactly who she is. That 11-minute window into her soul cemented a legacy she can no longer manipulate. And to be completely honest, I don't feel a single shred of guilt. I want to be entirely transparent about that, because I know people often expect these stories to wrap up with a neat Hollywood redemption arc, the tearful mother realizing her errors, a grand embrace, a clean slate. But that's not real life. She had a decade of chances. She had a wedding invitation. She had grandchildren. She had every single avenue a human being could possibly ask for to offer grace, and every single time, she chose her own ego. The list of demands wasn't a sudden mistake. It was the definitive summary of who she had always been, finally captured in high definition for the world to see. Linda and I sat out on our back porch a few evenings ago, watching our kids chase each other through the grass as the sun dipped below the tree line. She leaned over and asked me if, knowing everything I know now, I would still hit record. Every single time, I told her, kissing the top of her head, without a second of hesitation. No lingering regrets? The only thing I regret, I said, looking out at our children laughing in the twilight, is that it took an $11 million acquisition for the world to believe the truth about her prejudice. That she walked away from her own son over something that never should have mattered in the first place. Linda leaned her weight against my shoulder, and we just watched our kids play. Completely safe, completely loved, and entirely insulated from the cold, conditional world we had left behind. Sometimes my mind drifts back to that living room 9 years ago, the slow, deliberate placement of the coffee cup, the quiet verdict passed down before I could even finish my sentence. I used to carry a deep, heavy grief over what that night cost me, but standing here now, I see it with total clarity. It didn't cost me a family. It simply exposed one that never truly existed, clearing the path for me to build a real one of my own. What I gained instead was harder won, but far more real. A wife who never once asked me to shrink myself to make anyone else comfortable. A sister who found her courage 9 years late, but found it all the same, and has spent every day since trying to make up for lost time. A business partner who bet on us when nobody else would. A friend who wired a house with cameras because he trusted my judgment even when it scared him. A consultant who helped me turn a private wound into a public reckoning, precisely because she believed the truth deserved an audience. And 2 children who will never know what it feels like to be measured, judged, and found wanting by the people who are supposed to love them unconditionally. That, more than the $11 million, more than the viral video, more than the folded piece of paper with its 4 ridiculous demands, is the inheritance I actually care about passing down. My mother wanted a family photo to put the past behind us. She wanted it because a photo is easy, a single frozen moment that can be shown to neighbors and relatives as proof that everything is fine, that the wound never happened, that 9 years of silence was just a minor disagreement smoothed over by time and money. I understand now why she wanted that photo so badly. A photo doesn't ask questions. A photo doesn't say anything at all. It was never going to be that easy. Not after everything. Not after 9 years of exactly that kind of easy silence. Some doors, once you close them, are meant to stay that way. I closed mine, and I have never once looked back. If you liked this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories.